I want you to imagine you're back in 2004 as a young Spider-Man fan. You were just blessed with Spider-Man 2, which was a banger. And the next year you get to play Ultimate Spider-Man, which was also good. Now imagine your disappointment when Spider-Man 3 rolls around the corner and you get this.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your...
Needless to say, the Spider-Man reputation took a hit, but it was redeemed. Spider-Man Web of Shadows released the next year, and while it had some issues with level design, it still provided a great open-world Spider-Man game with swinging that many still consider the best. Then we got the more linear but no less great Shattered Dimensions and then Edge of Time. While many appreciate the games now, at the time the scores were not friendly. Then with the announcement of the new cinematic reboot titled The Amazing Spider-Man, we also received a movie tie-in game. Given the history, color me skeptical. But things have changed since the last few Spider-Man games. Most notably, things have changed with Batman. Since the release of Web of Shadows, the last open-world Spider-Man game we received, the Arkham series was already off the ground, and we had both Asylum and City to solidify the Dark Knight's seat on the throne atop the superhero genre. Spider-Man needed change, and the developers were acutely aware of the last few games' disappointing numbers. This game had aims of taking a realistic approach like the movie, but as you'll see, that vision is left unfulfilled. What we end up with is a game that, at the time, I loved. One with genuinely incredible animations, fun enough gameplay, and traversal that on one hand is the most shallow and accessible, but on the other is so unique with an arguably unintended amount of depth that I can't help but love it. It's a game that holds little back and truly allows the player to experience the more consistent large stakes battles. Is the sacrifice to the game's realism worth it? Is it worth sacrificing the story's consistency? The story here and many of the interactions aren't great, but the game is oozing with passion and fun, and The Amazing Spider-Man is a game that the developers clearly loved working on. What is most interesting about The Amazing Spider-Man is that while it has the set pieces and enough depth to satisfy for a few hours, the gameplay itself feels like a puddle imitating a pond. It has some of the same fundamentals of other great combat and stealth systems, but ultimately does not build upon those concepts, and when it does, they break down moments later. So no, this isn't an Amazing Spider-Man game, but I can't say it isn't an alright Spider-Man game. The first thing to notice here is the world and the art style, which is attempting a more realistic look. Characters' faces look fine if waxy, and the suit specifically for Spider-Man is great, which is needed given how the camera constantly pulls you close to him to feel the speed of the swinging. This is something few games have done well, and I think it's one of the defining features of this game's presentation, and something other games have not attempted to replicate. Perhaps for its habit of inducing motion sickness, but hey, I won't hate on a game trying something new. It gives the swinging a more cinematic feel that permeates through much of the story, but the grounded style is not all that's offered here, as many other aspects of this game exceed the scope of its presentation. Its ideas are not bound by desires for consistency or pacing, which in this rare case works in the game's favor.
Wait! Stop the video.
Oh my god, this guy again.
Last time I was here, you thought you had beaten me because you were using the convenient and accessible NordPass, which generates difficult passwords and remembers them so you don't have to, all while notifying you of any passwords that may be weak or compromised so that you can change them, which NordPass also does with just the click of a button. But I'm back, because I have discovered your IP address, and it tells me that you live in the United States.
Okay, wind it back. Why are you here again? You failed last time. I don't know if this should be your hobby here.
Because I have a job to do.
Job? You're a thief. You steal people's banking information for a living and you suck at it. I don't even live in the United States.
What? How'd I get it wrong?
Because I use NordVPN, and you can too by using the link in the description and pinned comment, which gets you an exclusive deal. A virtual private network is exactly what protects me from guys like you, because your IP can reveal where you live, your internet service provider, and it gives a hacker the ability to slow your internet to a crawl, which means you can kiss that rank up game goodbye. Masking my IP address also means that I can use public, otherwise unsecure Wi-Fi without worrying about others stealing my now encrypted data. But the best use of all is that I can watch TV shows that are only available on Netflix in other countries.
Wait, that actually sounds pretty convenient.
What are you still doing here? Go.
Okay.
Go!
Okay, sorry.
So if you're looking to protect your information, break free from any region restrictions, and take back your internet privacy today, you can go to nordvpn.com/thatboyaqua or click the link in the description or the pinned comment. And when you do, you'll receive an exclusive deal. In fact, you can purchase both NordVPN and NordPass at once. So enjoy the protection, and thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Voice acting is good enough, though I cannot say I'm a fan of Sam Riegel as Spider-Man. Perhaps this is because Yuri Lowenthal has spoiled my ears, but I have played Web of Shadows, so I have scraped the bottom of the barrel too, don't worry. Every other voice here works well for the character, and in fact, I wouldn't even say Peter's voice is bad. When speaking calmly, it works, and moments of drama are delivered well. It's only in the quips that the enthusiasm is dialed up to 11, which puts me off. This is most felt when swinging, as Peter continues to scream after swings to nauseating degrees. Get me out of this fucking spandex. I am sweating like your sister on Sunday church. Oh, God. Voice cameos from Bruce Campbell and Stan Lee are appreciated and done justice, but the accompanying soundtrack is where the game truly shines, as it's executed surprisingly well. It's the usual symphonies and triumphant horns, but the arrangements here were memorable enough to make me pause once in a while to admire it. Now here's a trip down memory lane. In my earlier videos, I used to speak about animations obsessively. I've made efforts to dial this back, but the reason I love talking about animations is that I feel it is often brutally underappreciated. And that goes for presentation as a whole. Mechanics, depth, stories, and characters are all important, arguably more so. But even if you press a button and it immediately responds with an attack, the visuals and audio are what give the attack the, excuse the pun, punch. It's what seals the deal, ties everything together, like icing on a cake. Continuing with the cake analogy, some good and bountiful icing has the ability to elevate an otherwise bland base. The Amazing Spider-Man has some fun ideas and swinging, but the presentation carries the game on its back. This will be illustrated by examining the presentation and peeling back the curtains to try and see what is mechanically taking place. Let's begin with the stealth, where you stalk your prey from the shadows. When you enter, you assess the room of guards, typically in the 1-digit count, before leaping down to strike one of them. In its infancy, you web them to the ground, but with some very early upgrades, you can begin webbing them to the ceiling so guards do not notice the missing body. Guards will only take note of their surroundings once you've been spotted or when a body has been discovered, which will not happen if webbed anywhere above them. So the gameplay loop becomes a short one. You find an isolated enemy, press a single button, and your job is done. You swoop in, pick them up, and assuming you aren't seen, you simply do it again. By even later into the game, you can begin taking down 2 enemies at once, making encounters even easier. Why then is stealth, relative to the runtime, engaging? Because it's never less than eye candy to see Peter jump down, arms spread but curled, only to land on an unsuspecting opponent and carry them to the ceiling. There are enough variations here, but they all share the slow motion and fluidity that makes something like this so enjoyable. Is it simple, and is this a minor example? Yes. But it applies to everything else in the game too, apart from the swinging, and I'll explain that later. It should also be noted that the stealth here is not challenging for the execution, but rather the planning. The only time you'll be spotted is if you didn't know your target was visible by someone else, and there's no indicator or spider sense to tell you where everyone is or if your target is safe for picking off. This means that upon entering a room, the goal is to scout the area and formulate a plan for longer than the execution, which is appreciated. And it feels less automated than Insomniac's stealth, even if the options for taking down thugs is lesser here. When in combat, things are as simple as pressing square, circle, and triangle. Each punch, however, carries weight and has a satisfying sound. What makes the combat carry impact for me is that there's a sense of speed with every punch, and the added slow motion helps emphasize the wind-up, release, and how quickly things are moving. Adding a slight effect to the tip of Peter's punch helps make it feel as though it truly connects with the enemy, and all of this is amplified when entering a high combo. A combo is increased through dishing out hits but not taking any, and once you reach a combo of 10, 8, and eventually as low as 6, you can begin stunning enemies and performing signature finishers on them. We, for simplicity's sake, will call this the signature combo rather than the combo boost. When in a signature combo, your basic attacks are elevated to be multi-hit flurries that prioritize speed over damage, and the speed lines that accompany your attacks add enough flair to impress by variety alone. But it's the finishers themselves that are a feast for the eyes. They incorporate webs more than any other attack and leave enemies stuck to the wall, ceiling, floor, wherever, with liquid flux. It doesn't change the way the game is played, in fact it becomes much simpler, but it does reward the player for playing well and offers the flair needed to somewhat hide the minimal depth in the combat. What the boasting visuals might have you miss is that the combat does not change from the moment you begin the game. There may be some very minor variables, but again those variables are rendered moot shortly after. For example, some enemies will begin carrying riot shields that shut down an upfront approach. The solution is to jump behind them and attack, which adds a bit more thought to what is otherwise just mashing square. The problem is that very soon after you receive 2 upgrades, one that does up to 60% more damage when attacking an enemy from behind, but another that allows you to ignore their blocks when in a signature combo. These enemies show up, add little challenge, and are then gone as quick as they came. A similar thing is true for the robots here, which is that eventually they'll have a defensive shield that must be webbed before they take damage. Simple enough, but once more an upgrade allows your web strike to permanently disable their shields, so the challenge dissolves. While we're on the topic, we might as well talk about the upgrades, of which more than half are completely useless. When designing a game such as this, I believe that an upgrade or ability should give you more options and make the combat easier by giving you more ways to defeat your enemies. But this alone can't work. It needs to be balanced out by new enemies that add more challenge. I was expecting the Amazing Spider-Man to introduce new enemies that are basic to take down at first, but when even more are introduced, we have combat encounters that have 5 different enemy types, thus 5 different strategies that must be considered, preventing repetition and making the signature combos harder to pull off, and accordingly more rewarding. Instead, with these upgrades, the method never changes, and this is assuming you're only engaging in the hand-to-hand combat. Before nearly every encounter, you can scan the room and find a throwable object that will leave every enemy stunned, allowing you to defeat them for free. There are multiple interactions extractables in each map, so it won't be hard to find them and outright skip encounters. Continuing with this idea, there are upgrades that improve damage and allow you to get a signature combo earlier, so again, there is no challenge. And when there is, it's minor and fleeting. When you do take damage on rare occasions, your suit will take damage too. Tank enough and it's too much for YouTube. But a little detail like this, which is applied to most suits, is one idea I'd love to see return in future entries in the Spider-Man series. The only enemy that remotely changes the way you play is the Infected, who must be defeated through signature attacks, but even then, you're probably farming for signature combos throughout the game anyways. So if you're playing optimally, nothing changes. But hey, this game might not have the deepest combat or even the most interesting enemy types. Infected, thugs, and Oscorp goons are essentially everything on offer, but the boss fights, now those are fun. There's a series of fights against both cross-species and Oscorp robots, and they are great spectacles. Fighting the Scorpion sees you dodging consecutive attacks from him, and occasionally he'll pounce at you or spray poison on the floor, forcing you to move to the air. Fighting the Vermin sees you dodging multi-attack combos, and the occasional pounce, but there are rats on the floor that will damage you, so you should move to the air. The final fight against the Lizard will see him pouncing at you and dishing out multi-hit combos that you need to dodge. Yeah, once again, the presentation here is what carries these fights, because once you look beneath the pretty surface, you see the gameplay is the same over and over again. The boss fights in general never exit the complexity of the first hour, and on one hand, I am okay with that. You can have set pieces that are all visuals, minimal gameplay. I mean, the first 3 Uncharted games were the epitome of that for me, but it's clear the developers desired something more, at least I think. I mean, the swinging is creative, innovative, and the ideas here are fun and new, yet the execution everywhere else just feels lacking. Perhaps this was due to time constraints or budget constraints, but the fight against the SO1 bot is fun because it's nothing like we've seen before. But when moving to the SO2 bot, we're doing the same thing, webbing some fans and doing a web strike. At least with the robots, there's enough variation to fool players, and the added second phase is good enough. The fight against the Rhino is probably the best purely for its timing. He shows up after the first hour, and you defeat him by letting him ram into a truck 3 times. It's simple, which is good given that it's one of the first fights, and it tends to end quickly. In the rematch, there's an added layer of challenge in that the arena is smaller, which means less time to prepare, and you need to web up an area for Rhino to get caught in, which improves the fight significantly. The penultimate fight against the Piranha cross-species is done well because there's something to deal with other than a few attacks. The Piranha can move freely in the water, so you'll need to drain the water to force it out. It'll also summon some lesser piranhas that you need to take out, which creates a small juggling act. The biggest problem with this fight is that it shouldn't have been so late in the game. This is a perfect mid-game battle, but the idea that this is the peak of the boss fights, and yet it is still brutally easy, is disappointing. The best boss fight is against Black Cat, as it sees you incorporating stealth into a fight and having an enemy for once use the shadows against you. I wouldn't consider it anything groundbreaking, but it stood out purely for being different. I might be treating the game harshly, and it should be noted that much like Uncharted, it is still fun. When looking at things below the surface, I can acknowledge that there isn't much here, but I'm also capable of ignoring that for the sake of enjoyment, and I did enjoy this game quite a bit. One of the reasons I did was the swinging, which flies in the face of everything I've said about the gameplay thus far. The combat and stealth both have poor balancing, progression, wear their inspirations on their sleeves, and no mechanical depth to supplement the incredible looks on display. The swinging, on the other hand, has original ideas, looks great, and strikes a perfect balance between being accessible and no sacrifice to the fantasy, and yet rewards those who properly engage with it. The swinging is the most important part of any Spider-Man game. It's the one thing that is entirely unique to Spider-Man's moveset. Other heroes can stick to walls and others are proficient acrobats, but none traverse like he does. In this game, the swinging takes a more cinematic approach, which is appreciated, but it also takes a more automated approach for those who need it. You can throw out a line and let go whenever you like, but if you simply hold R2, the game will do all the heavy lifting for you. Some may call that lazy or too simple, but the fact that you don't have to use it this way makes it great in my eyes, because you never know what someone's first Spider-Man game will be. One of my first games was Ultimate Spider-Man, and because of that, I still have nightmares of Johnny Storm whooping my 8-year-old ass. When swinging, you can let go at specific points to gain speed, momentum is carried properly from a dive, and while web climbing and boosting are missing here, I can excuse their absence in place of what's new. Another mechanic that initially seems simplistic and accessible, but has depth just below the surface, is the web rush. A mechanic where you can peer through the eyes of Spider-Man to the point of seeing the lenses of the mask, and choose a point where Spider-Man will then web himself to. In combat, it can be used to web strike a specific enemy, but in the open world, it can be used to zip to a specific point with exact precision. There are a few different systems working at the same time here. For example, the game will automatically add some flare between point A and B at random. So while on one zip, you may jump off a wall to get to your destination, in other cases, you will go straight to it. Now I call it random because I believe there is an element of chance, but you can also control what animation will play if you consider your environment. Peter won't bounce off a wall if there are no walls near your path. Another thing to consider is that your destination can be changed mid-rush. So you can start by aiming at a wall, and once near the wall, aim in the other direction. If performed correctly, Peter will bounce off the wall because his current trajectory is already taking him there, and use it to head to the next destination, and this chain can be endless. You can traverse the entire New York skyline without swinging. On its own, the system is an interesting concept, but it is elevated once you realize that you don't always have to peer through Peter's eyes. If you simply tap a location, you'll web rush there, and every aforementioned tech can be performed this way assuming you are quick enough. Now there's an element of skill required to traverse, and the reward is having a cinematic swing unimpeded by the mask. Now you have to make split decisions, and the execution must be a fast flick to a destination that is followed up by another within seconds, which is assuming you're trying to be fast, efficient, and intentional. Instead of just web zipping to a car you're chasing down, why not run along the buildings and streetlights to give you a boost? Instead of swinging around a corner, zip to an adjacent wall and bounce off of it to execute a hard 90-degree pivot. The greatest part of the web rush is that it integrates well with the swinging and functions best in tandem. When web rushing, you'll ease in and ease out respectively, and this can be used to your advantage. Easing out means you have more time to find the next destination, making aiming a bit easier. The problem that comes up is that when you ease out, your momentum is stunted, which makes a following swing not as strong, even if that swing is following a dive. The solution is canceling the web rush animation. This can be done at any time, making misinputs savable, but if done at the point in which you are at your max speed, just before you ease out, you'll keep the momentum and carry that into your dive or swing. This minor technique brings the movement to a whole new level and now rewards proper timing across the board, leading to some truly terrific swings that look effortless. This is why the swinging flies in the face of every other part of this game. It's deep, rewards skilled players while not leaving the inexperienced in the dust, and has a unique idea. I'll admit, there are plenty of things missing here like proper web zipping, but these sacrifices are not in vain. Making use of different abilities and systems to get from point A to B in a fashionable way while making it appear easy? I'm not gonna say it makes you feel like Spider-Man or anything, but come on, man. New York itself is fine enough. I certainly have no complaints, but the game seems to run roughly across the board, especially these days. I won't hold it against the game. I can't expect developers to optimize for machines 10 years in the future, but it should be noted that if you can somehow get your hands on the game today, you'll be suffering from frame drops, crashes, but not many glitches. I can at least confirm the game runs poorly on the PS Vita. I don't know why I have this, but it's here and it's impressive enough for having the whole game on the go, but you're leaving the resolution and frame rates at home. The open world itself is enjoyable because there's plenty to do here. Collecting comic books is fine enough, though the sheer abundance is a bit absurd, and there's civilians that can be picked up and brought to either a hospital or police station. The best the world offers is random encounters with the spider bots. A drone will approach as you're swinging, and if you don't web it up, it'll summon a spider bot that is a full-on boss fight in the open world. I really wish more games did this. It's fluid and it keeps even the endgame swinging interesting. Said endgame is standard, offering a few side quests and outposts to clear and a disappointing amount of suits. The suits are unlocked by performing some long tasks. Some of them include collecting all comic pages, completing all side quests, and getting 100% completion. The suits that are here look good, but I wish there were more. Compared to the other games of the time, it is excusable, but I still wanted more. The Oscorp Lab side quests see you entering an area guarded by armed security, hacking a few computers, and leaving. They all function like this, and there was a little challenge. They reward exclusive upgrades that do nothing but buff attacks and reduce damage taken. The two side quests revolving around Rhino and cross species were enjoyable, so I don't mind them not having a reward. Unfortunately, despite this game having some great locales and set pieces, a surprising amount of environments are sewer themed. You'll be consistently trudging through the mud and muck, screen covered in green, and yet the Oscorp levels are equally as frequent, presenting a sleek and modern high-rise, slowly being infected by the cross-species virus. But the lows of the septic levels are not without some high notes. Every fight against the kaiju-sized robots was enjoyable for the spectacle alone, and the final one is particularly enjoyable for allowing us to team up with the lizard. The pace of these fights is great, and that's a praise that can be applied across the board here. While the gameplay isn't the best we've seen, I can't say many gimmicks or even environments hang around for too long. The entire game can be finished in 6 hours, but it's not like the whole ride is non-stop action. There are a few minor areas where the game slows to a crawl, and it becomes abundantly clear that you're doing the same thing over and over again. When entering an Oscorp lab, you'll come across a room where an elevator is locked by 4 generators in 4 rooms. To proceed, you'll need to enter each room and destroy the generator, taking down thugs along the way. The layout and enemy placements are so similar to one another that it became terribly repetitive, and what follows is 4 more generators that are powering the electric floor within the elevator. The floor cycles fast enough to force a loop of dropping down, hitting a generator a few times, jumping back to the wall, rinse and repeat. Moments like this, while boring, are the lowest the game hits, and are counteracted by moments of satisfaction. I enjoyed creating a web in the sewers and using it to track down the cross species just like in the movie, and this idea was used sparingly. significantly. The best activities are those for the Extreme Reporter, voiced by Bruce Campbell. There are two kinds of challenges, drone runs and time trials. The drone run sees Spidey moving along a predetermined path, and our goal is to keep the camera on him, which, while not long, are mechanically bare. The only fun part is seeing the ending animation, but those could have been slotted at the end of a race instead. After each drone run, there is a race where you move from flare to flare. You don't get to see the next flare until the current flare is collected, so pathing can be a bit slow, and I wasn't a fan of how linear these were. There was often no room to create our own paths, and it makes me wish the races had less gates to pass through, or the time constraints tighter to force new strategies. In fact, many races can be completed by just web rushing directly to the flare, so no thought is required. In its current form, while there are a lot of them, they were okay. At least the music was good. But no game these days is complete without DLC. There's a ton of add-ons for this game, and it is certainly varied. The first I'll talk about is the Rhino Rampage, which sees you playing as Rhino, rushing along the streets and crushing cars for both points and extra time. It isn't anything special, but a fun mode to fart around in, which goes doubly so for the Lizard Rampage. Playing as Connors gives you access to proper attacks and even the ability to jump long distances. You have to destroy generators for more time and defeat enemies along the way, and I would have enjoyed some free roaming abilities for Connors, but we fortunately get that with the Stan Lee pack. It's a simple skin swap with some new voice lines that offers a simple comic collection challenge within the open world with 3 variations that can satisfy. At the end of each run, a cutscene plays that celebrates Spider-Man's 50th anniversary, and it's the goofiest cutscene that truly comes out of left field. It's so ridiculous I can't help but love it. If you're familiar with this game, then you know I'm missing 2 excellent pieces of DLC, presented under the Oscorp Search and Destroy pack, originally listed for $3 American. It features one game where you play as a spider hunter cleaning up the city by shooting Oscorp robots with red lasers and curing the infected with green lasers. It is literally Space Invaders. Moving on, we can look at the next game. And you know what? Close your eyes and just let your imagination run wild for a moment. The game sees us piloting the SO2 robot and moving through the streets, destroying cars, buses, but we have to watch out because Spider-Man will web up some barriers that must be avoided. Now take whatever you're imagining and forget it, because this is literally Snake. You know, there are plenty of games these days that might not look the best, and a common comment you see from people is, this game looks like a mobile game, and it's obviously an exaggerated and crude insult, but this is one of the few times you can honestly say this looks like a mobile game. Don't believe me? Zoom out! Yeah, the whole thing takes place within a phone. I talk about DLC a lot, and specifically, I cover season passes or add-ons that I believe are DLC done right. A common question that I get asked is, what do you think is DLC done wrong? This. A good DLC is one that adds to the world, the ideas, and the gameplay presented in the base game, and this DLC does none of that. The Stan Lee pack is fine and the Lizard Rampage is also fine, but the Rhino Challenge is boring and the mobile games are just that. So I think it goes without saying that this DLC sucks spider balls. And it just feels bad to say, because there's so many points here where the game has prioritized fun above all else. There's enough references here to please even the most hardcore of comic fans, and the crazy no-holds-barred boss fights make it clear to me that fulfilling a brain-off power fantasy was key, and I think that was achieved here. The story doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also has its good moments, and of course Easter eggs everywhere. It takes place after the first movie, which is odd given that it came out a week earlier, so spoilers for that I guess. But it acts as either an alternative to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or a strange The Amazing Spider-Man 1.5. The game begins a few months after the film, with Dr. Connors behind bars in an asylum. We see that after Peter and Gwen discovered that Oscorp, specifically Alistair Smythe, is continuing Connors' cross-species research, which leads to an outbreak and a virus. Peter, feeling there's nowhere to run, comes to Connors to create a cure. Peter breaks him out, which leads to many others escaping unintentionally, and paints the two of them public enemy number 1. As the two develop a cure, Spider-Man heads back to Oscorp to give it to Gwen, but Smythe steals it and uses it on himself. The cure didn't work, leading to his legs being disabled. Gwen is now further doubting Connor's scientific ability, explaining that he even killed her father. But the boys are determined, and after using Peter's blood as a template, Connors was able to create a proper cure. Along the way, Peter has been dealing with the different cross-species, and eventually he is captured by Smythe, and has nanobots injected into him that suppress the cross-species DNA within him, rendering his powers useless. After barely escaping Oscorp into a city of ruins, he heads down to Connor's old lab in the sewers where Peter, Connors, and Gwen devise a plan involving Connors turning back into the Lizard again to stop Smythe, but before Peter can protest, he loses consciousness. He's later revived by Gwen using defibrillators, and the electricity caused the nanobots to be temporarily disabled. So Peter decides to fry himself enough to destroy the nanobots, and he gets his powers back. Now with Connors at his side, he takes down Smythe and chases after Connors, who's lost control of the Lizard. Peter finds him, cures him, Connors returns to the asylum, and all seems well. The game finishes with a news report explaining that Smythe has escaped the authorities, and Peter's about to jump into action, but Gwen stops him. And for good reason, as a post-credit scene showcases Smythe entering Oscorp and being killed by the spider bots, because he's now a proper cross-species. Poetic that his death is a result of his own evil, but don't expect me to segue into more positives here. The Amazing Spider-Man has a considerable amount of fun with itself, which makes the short story enjoyable, but I won't argue that it is anything deeper than excuses for set pieces. In between, there are references everywhere, like a newspaper that boasts the movie's success, and even features an article about the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man next to it. References are made to Michael Morbius, and there's even a live updating infection count that appears after every chapter. The arcs here are borderline non-existent, and those that are here squander what the movie had set up. For example, Peter and Gwen should not be on speaking terms during the game, as the movie made it clear that things were not well between them. If this is meant to be canon, then this implies that Peter went back to her, and then between this game and The Amazing Spider-Man 2, they fell out again. There are other inconsistencies that nearly add to the experience with how awful they are. In the opening scene where Peter, in regular civilian clothes, is sneaking with Gwen, barely anyone questions why a civilian is in a top secret area after hours. Furthermore, when attempting to be sneaky, they speak their dialogue at a loud enough level to make me believe the people in front of them are deaf.
Whoa, what is that?
Oh my god. This could be proof they're continuing Connor's work.
Some lines are not as funny, like when Spider-Man unironically says, "Don't tase me, bro," to a security guard.
I have to help you? You tased me, bro.
Regardless, the story here was nothing to write home about, but the moment-to-moment interactions carry a lot of the runtime here. Unfortunately, I'm a broken record that just keeps repeating the sentiment that while in this case the story has a brittle foundation, there are enough shiny keys being dangled in front of my face to keep my gorilla brain distracted. So much of the story when not distracted makes little sense. Peter and Connors are captured because according to Smythe, his address was found in the Oscorp files. Problem is that his address according to any public knowledge would be Aunt May's house. The apartment he's occupying is Stan Lee's, unless he decided to update the file within the few months that he was house sitting there. Once Smythe is defeated, Peter has a discussion with him about the harm he's causing, and within these few sentences, Smythe explains that he realizes what he has done. Perhaps this was a fake out and he was just saying that to get Peter off of his back, but either way, this is ridiculous. Then the game has the gall to have Connors deliver a line about morality, claiming that Smythe saw the world in black and white, but really, everything is just shades of gray. Look, I can agree with this sentiment, but not only is this line not earned, it just feels overdramatic. I understand where it's coming from. Dr. Connors wanted to help people, but has been painted as a villain when in reality it's much more complicated than that. Connors in this game is a good guy. In fact, when he is doubted by Peter because he left the apartment, we find out it is because he went to look at his family and daydream of the day that they might forgive him. Even when turning into the lizard again, he does so because someone needs to save the day and Spider-Man couldn't. That's not a bad thing to do, so I find it difficult to see him as anything more than a good guy in this game. And even with the context of the movie, he wasn't a bad guy either, just someone who was under pressure and made bad decisions. We could argue all day about the intricacies of this, like Connor's actions in the movie being somewhat excusable because he had the untested serum in his brain, which clouded his thoughts. But either way, the line in this game came off as incredibly goofy. I, despite these issues, or at times because of these issues, still enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man, but the playthrough was undermined by a particular elephant in the room, or rather, a bat. I'm sure throughout this video you've had similar thoughts, but the game shares some admitted similarities to the Arkham series. I've always been one to dispute claims of games being an Arkham clone, and I don't think this is a ripoff per se, but you cannot deny the inspirations that line Peter's spandex. The Arkham games influenced countless games after it, so it makes sense that games within the superhero genre would borrow ideas. The problem? The Amazing Spider-Man borrows only the foundation for its combat and none of what makes it the gold standard. Yes, the combat is based on combos and countering, but the reward for combos of 6 or higher make the combat incredibly easy. It's also significantly worse than the Arkham series because there is no added challenge. The reason Arkham's combat worked so well was because by the end of the game there was more than just a few goons. They carried weapons, all of which required different methods of disarming. In The Amazing Spider-Man, every enemy is dealt with in almost the same way. The riot shield enemies must be attacked from behind, just like Arkham, but if you have a signature combo, they can be defeated through normal attacks. There's also no weapon disarming ability, no mini-bosses, no meaningful upgrades, and it is all fine. Yeah, it's okay, but it could have been so much more. The stealth is in the same boat. If we're going to wear the inspiration so clearly, why don't we go all the way with it? Sure, you'd have people calling it a ripoff, but it would lead to a better game. And with any game in the superhero genre being compared to Arkham, let them make that comparison. Let them call it a ripoff. Those words mean nothing because they're so often pinned on games that don't deserve it. Calling a game an Arkham ripoff is the same as calling any game with a parry function a Souls-like, or any open world shooter Skyrim with guns. But what we have now is painfully average. Sure, the swinging works well and the web rush is an actual original idea. But were it not for the exceptional set pieces, it would not surprise me if this ended up being one of the lesser loved Spider-Man games. Now allow me to continue to contradict myself. Greatly, I still liked the game. The Amazing Spider-Man has been such a tough game to tackle because even though I can find problems in every corner of the game and a laundry list of missed or botched ideas, I enjoyed myself. I think the reason is that above all else, this game is unique, not in all its ideas, but in its execution, and in relation to the rest of the characters' outings. I still find value in this game for being an enjoyable turn your brain off adventure, and one that thankfully does not overstay its welcome. Hi everyone, thank you for watching this latest video. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe or hit the like button, or if you really want to support the channel and help me make videos hopefully faster and better, you can subscribe to the Patreon down below or become a YouTube member. The benefits for doing so is having your name on screen, which are the names that are on screen right now. Thank you to everyone who is already supporting me. Your support means the world and I appreciate you greatly, but it also means you get videos early. You will get a video a minimum of like 2 days early, but often if I have a video ready, say like, because sometimes I work ahead during the school semester, I'll work ahead in the first couple weeks of the semester so that when finals and midterms come around, I can take proper time off from YouTube and not be behind on videos. And so when I do work ahead, it means sometimes you get videos up to like a week early. So if you're interested in that, you can hit the link in the description. You'll also see videos that don't have ads, including any sponsor segments. So yeah, I'm gonna try and add some more Patreon benefits soon, but I'm more just working on keeping videos coming. I think I kind of want to try streaming on the side on the second channel. So if that ends up transpiring, I will put a link in the description or I'll make a community post. And yeah, that's basically all that's going on with me. I appreciate you guys for being so supportive. The infamous compilation video hit 1 million views, and that is like crazy to me. I've never had a video hit 1 million that fast. In fact, I've only ever had like 3 videos hit 1 million views. So I know some of you are going to be asking about it. What do I think about the Suicide Squad trailer and the gameplay that they showed off as of recording this just yesterday? And the answer is, yeah, it looks all right. I think the gameplay looks really good. I think Harley Quinn's grappling hook is going to be so fun to use, and I think Captain Boomerang's movement just looks incredible. I think Deadshot looks a little boring, and King Shark just looks like a goofball. His stupid face is honestly hilarious. And I have my reservations about it being a shooter, just because I feel like the hand-to-hand combat in Rocksteady's games have always been so good, but I'm keeping an open mind. They have not done wrong yet. Some people might say, oh, well, they made Arkham Knight, and Arkham Knight wasn't good. And honestly, if Arkham Knight is the worst that Rocksteady has done, I am perfectly happy with that. Yeah, I know the battle passes and whatnot is really disheartening to see, but I'm hoping that it is not very intrusive. And if we're lucky, we might get a Gotham Knights situation where it seemed the game was going to be this live action or live service game, and then halfway through development, it got dialed back because even though that live service DNA is still present within Gotham Knights, I think the fact that it wasn't capitalized on with all these microtransactions made the game much better, and I think did some favors for the game, which it desperately needs given how much that game got shitted on. So yeah, I'm keeping myself hopeful, but not necessarily optimistic. I'm more just gonna wait and see more gameplay. And yeah, sorry, that was a bit long-winded. Thank you so much for watching this video. The next video will take a while to come out because it's quite big and I'm trying to really knuckle down on writing some better scripts. So I love you guys. Take care of yourselves and stay safe.